How amazing is this? We're all physically in the room together. And also, for those online, hi, thank you for joining today. And glad to see that you managed to get out of your shorts. I know for me, it's been a bit of a challenge getting back into this type of attire, but it's really been a great pleasure to actually be here and, sort of see how it feels like again to be up on stage. Today, I'm going to be talking about reimagining the digital playing field. And as Sundi mentioned, data is core to that. And I'm going to talk about the CDO's future agenda, some of insights that we're seeing across the region and around the world. But more importantly, in your roles, how can you adapt and transform your agenda to stay future fit? So if you look at this slide, I think COVID has given us all a mega shot of something digital, be it Netflix streaming, be it online shopping, or if you've been watching TikTok recently, trial by TikTok. The way that we receive information and news has transformed. The way that we interact is here to stay. So with that context, and of all of us being consumers and people working in enterprise, how have our expectations changed in the way we work? How do we incorporate these new behavioral shifts in the trends that we see coming forward? So this has accelerated digital across the world. And if you look at some of the key areas that we are seeing as picking up massively, we have metaverse and NFT. Who would have guessed a $69 million NFT has been sold? But as mentioned, private equity are pouring money into this space. It's estimated that the metaverse might be worth $8 trillion as a market pace. Crypto and blockchain. We're working with a lot of DeFi organizations today, but actually what's really important is that there is so much lack of resource. We cannot find enough blockchain consultants or coders or developers across the region. That's how fast people are looking for these type of capabilities and resources. ESG, as you know, is really transforming the way we work. And if you look at really the trends of us even catching an airline and having a carbon score, it's impacting our daily lives and the metrics that require us and will be enforced by governments and organizations for us to regulate and track metrics, again, links to data. And as you know, with 5G and IoT, not so emerging anymore, but starting to proliferate in terms of devices. Billions of devices, petabytes of data, monetized, captured, and really trying to transform the way that we operate businesses. But to do that, we need platforms, democratized platforms, open data platforms, platforms that can interact within our organization and externally. So how do we as CDOs evolve? And the processing power that's linked to this leads to quantum computing. Even the lack of space or connectivity is starting to drive satellites in space, low orbit satellites and connectivity. So these are some of the trends that we're seeing. But the biggest question we will ask is, will Bitcoin go to 1 million or to 0? But the point really is that the market is hot and cold in this space. But just like it's mentioned in the 2000, the dot bust and dot boom and dot bust is there are going to be a lot of emerging giants that come out of this phase. So I want to share with you who are the emerging giants in Asia Pacific. And this will also inform us as to what's coming. KPMG did some research, and this is hot off the press. So it's actually not been launched yet, so it's a bit of a preview. But we looked at 150,000 pre-unicorns worth about $500 million or below across the Asia Pacific region. Close to 6,500 of these companies, and we noticed an interesting split, or maybe not so interesting in terms of China and India coming out as number 1 and 2, but Japan, Australia, China, and Singapore and Korea covering around 90% of the total population of those unicorns or the pre-unicorns. What also was really interesting was we looked at all the tags of what industries and areas these emerging technology-related companies were looking at. And of the 130 emerging sectors that were tagged, you will see, and the top 10 being NFTs, decentralized finance, electric vehicles, and you can read on. But what you can see there is that there's an interesting trend around the type of companies that come out of these, that are being invested in around the region. We saw significant Web 3.0 interest. And we're also seeing a lot of mention around platform and developers. So what was really interesting was that particularly emerging markets, the top 10, 20 of these companies were all talking around platform and developers being their avenue to market. And this reinforces the fact that a developer of a company can expand across the region and around the world. And the capabilities and skills link back to software, data, and monetization capabilities. So what is the Web 3.0? And I won't have a lot of time to elaborate too much on this, but I really just want to layer the conversation for you to sort of systematically think about where you sit today and what you need to be thinking about the future. We all remember Web 1. Some of these brands you may remember. One-way search, linear interactions. Web 2 is more centralized, and we've seen how in the dot boom, all these companies, many of them expanded and bust, many of them expand to be multi-trillion-dollar companies today. And I think you can see that's happening, what's taking space in that area today. But with decentralized web, where the connectivities are more decentralized in the way they interact, that creates another level of interaction, another level of how data operates, another way of how businesses operate. So as CDOs, what's important to think about is, who are those companies that A, impact the way I operate, communicating B2C with customers or B2B interactions, data pipelines, data use cases. In short, the ability to bring all this together within your organization, externally and across the different parts of the Web 3.0 ecosystem is going to be quite critical in the way that we look at and transform our business. So what will the future look like? How do we anticipate? And what is the race to digital superiority? So I'm going to spend a bit of time taking you through some thoughts and ideas as to how to do this and what we are informing our clients around the region and around the world to think about as you progress your path to digital superiority. In November 2021, we did a research with 300 executives from the TMT sector. These are the leading tech companies around the world. 75% believe that using enterprise data effectively can radically transform their business models. It's probably no surprise to you with that statement there. Only 57% had an enterprise data strategy. And that's probably even not considering Web 3.0 that's coming. And only 32% of them fully utilize customer data. So I think if you think about that as leaders, where do you sit across those three areas? And have you got what you need in place to really monetize and extrapolate and take on both the internal opportunities and external opportunities that present yourselves today? So I wanted to talk through some pathfinders, and these pathfinders are things that may or may not work for you, but they're items that you might want to consider as you rethink your path for digital superiority. Global hyperlocal. Do global programs work, or do you need to localize for local tastes? We've seen that through the emerging giants that there's a lot of hyperlocal activity. So the action and competition is there. A copy-paste approach may not work as simple as it used to. Language, ways of interaction, local applications all need to be thought about when you localize. We used to develop things and push out. We need to redesign CX to DX, customer interaction, being clear on the customer benefit. We're very process focused as organizations, but as you know, the digital natives are more outcome focused in the way they operate. How do we transform our metrics in our organization to be more focused on those outcomes? We need to move from data silos to data fabric. Data traversing across your network securely safely within compliance and regulation, but being able to do swiftly enough to monetize at speed, not your 6 to 9 months product cycle times. And last, actually, but most importantly, I believe, the move towards from linear thinkers to lateral thinking, or exponential thinkers. The ability to problem solve is going to be far more important going forward than the ability to purely execute on your current business model. And the reason is your business model is changing. And the ability to think differently about how to solve problems, connecting the dots, if you think about left and right brain thinkers, is the difference in the type of individuals you might want to think about within your organization. So I'm not sure if this is how you feel sometimes. You heard that we're building the plane as we fly. You've heard about agile. But sometimes it does feel like we're in the air, we've got all our hands up trying to do everything at once. I think we need to get used to that feeling and making decisions swiftly, but in the direction of where you want the organization to go. So I want to talk about some 3 key areas that I think would really improve or think about transforming your business. Some of these areas you may be doing already, but I think hopefully this is a bit of a refresher around how to think differently about these areas. Number 1 is integrating exponential technologies. We know technologies will increase, exponential technologies will come in, but how do we know which ones to choose and which ones do we actually integrate and at what time? We've heard about business innovation. Everyone's got innovation centers, but how are they business outcome orientated? How can you tweak that? We've heard about ecosystem and multi-dimensional ecosystems, but how do we integrate those ecosystems and be deliberate about the partners we choose? Are we clear about the next 10, 20, 50, or are we just continually trying? What's the technology pulse? How are you being informed consistently about what's coming? Not to implement everything you see, but on the horizon, see those trends of where are the top 3 areas that I need to relook at and incorporate or consider as I path my technology journey. Who owns that journey? And how do your boards, and are your boards aware of those technology and exponential technologies? A few years back, I mentioned at this same event, data democratization. I think now more than ever, this is really being important. And I think you'll hear a lot about that into today's conference. Hyperlocal implementation of data, fluid data models, ROI metrics. I think we're used to our standard business metrics, but if you're starting to see what companies are looking at now is customer acquisition costs, lifetime value of customer. Because if you look at a lifetime value of a customer, with that data mindset, it can be a lot more than just that one interaction that you see today. Real-time governance and policies. Trust is important to our clients. If we're sharing data that breaks trust, our business will be broken as quick as it was developed. And you can see how quickly overnight companies like Facebook have moved towards this meta view and the impact of a company like TikTok has done on their business. How quick that was during COVID. I talked about the creatives and the linear thinkers, capability uplift programs. Do we have the right people in place? Use case pipelines. Do we have a use case pipeline? And how do they align to the outcomes of the business? And domain experts. This is an important part because I really believe that as you start to move across adjacencies into other markets and sectors, you need to understand how their business model works as well as your business model works. And then creating those win-win instances where when data is shared, you can monetize those effectively. I work a lot with telco companies that are moving into adjacencies. And one of the biggest challenges I see is they don't understand the other sector they're trying to work into. For example, embedded finance into telco, embedded insurance, embedded health, these type of interactions. So understanding those other sectors are critical. So as leaders, how can we change the trajectory of our business? And what I'm talking about here is small tweaks that if done at the right trajectory will create an exponential change in the way our business grows. I'm not in for throwing out the whole plan and restarting again, because that is kind of a bit of a challenge for where we sit in our organization today. So I think one of the key messages I'd like to leave is around being future-minded. We are very focused on the next quarterly review, the next business review. And I think being future-minded will help involve the way that we think about our plans. This is really critical. So how do you ensure that you've incorporated that into your business model and the way of operating? This one is really important for me, actually, when I say this, the team dynamic. If you take a look at your team today and ask yourselves, what is the breadth of capabilities and skills? And if we go back to the analogy of left and right brain thinking, problem solving versus linear execution, what's the right mix for my team? Do I have enough in that mix to give the diversity of that dynamic of outside-in ideas? We work with boards around the world, and as you know, there are a lot of reasons, but the boards are changing their mix. And it's beyond this ESG and sort of more diversity impact. It actually creates diversity at that level. Whether it be different industry, male and female demographics, they all bring different ideas. And so in that way, your team also needs to be thinking around what is that dynamic and how do you foster creativity and driving change within your frameworks. And last but not least, those strategic tweaks. What are those 2 or 3 things that you can tweak to change the trajectory of your business today? And if you think about some of the areas that we discussed today, the technology trends, what's coming, what I need to focus on, and how do I make those tweaks to make exponential growth, they're one of the key messages I'd like to leave with you today. And actually, for the rest of today, as you listen to what's coming, those sound bites that will, by the end of the day, you can add up and take away and say, well, these are the things that I can do to change my business and how I operate. But ultimately, the key differentiator is you. You're empowered to make the changes. You're empowered to inform. You're empowered to take the ideas that you hear from these wonderful events, to take those changes into your organization and empower your teams and shape the way that they think and operate. And that's why I'm so excited to always be part of these conferences, because I learn so much from the audiences I work with and my fellow panelists and speakers. So with that, I'd like to leave you with this image, which is an NFT, but really just say thank you, for coming, because it's these events that are needing to come back to life. Really inspire you and hopefully think about not just what I've said today, but really focus your minds around what's to come. And to all my fellow panelists and speakers coming up, I wish you a great success for the conference and really look forward to interacting with you in the coming months and years. Thanks, everyone. I think it's a tough one, that one, to answer. That space is, I think there's a lot of hype in that space, to be honest, as you can see. But there is credibility around the purpose of what an NFT is, digital, non-fungible. So if there is an asset that can be exploited or used in a way, art is a good example, digital art, you know, a Picasso versus a replica, those type of things are definitely important. So NFT pure play versus subsidiaries of larger companies, I see larger companies more playing in that space. And I think for me, just being across that space is important. You know, if you're not in the space, it's hard to appreciate and understand not just the terminology, what's happening. You need to be in the basketball game or in the game to feel involved in it versus being purely a spectator. So I think it's a mix, and I think it's not entirely clear exactly, to be very frank. Yeah, so I think it is a challenge. It is an interesting topic, though. Yeah,
it's a good thing to keep an eye on. I think the next question is, given the Luna debacles, things can shift in the wrong direction pretty fast. How would tech navigate to avoid any disasters?
Yeah, Luna, as you can see, it's gone to zero now. They're trying to recover. My view is the technology of blockchain and crypto, I think, is here to stay. Decentralized networks. My point of view is that within that bell curve, there are a lot of speculative things that are maybe hype, versus real value. So if you look at what I see with, say, blockchain and crypto, I'm seeing more around decentralized finance, like instant payments, not having to keep records in a central location. You could decentralize that. Trust can be decentralized in the way it's operating. So if you look at that world, I feel like that type of technology and those type of companies are companies you would look at. There's a lot of other companies in that wave, and just like the .com, remember when that happened and all those companies that bust, again, by nature, there's going to be a lot in that space. The second thing is that there's a lot of private equity money out there still, and it's been going and distributing across all these startups because the stock market is high. They're putting it in other asset classes. So I think there's a lot of hype in that space too. So I think the main thing would be really looking at the core value of what does that company solve? What's the problem it solves for? And is it relevant to my business? That would be, I mean, it's a classical response, but it is really probably an accurate response. And if you can't articulate what Luna does for you, then I would probably question whether it's worth putting your money into it. Or if you're a trader and you're speculating on trading, then perhaps that's probably where you want to be playing as a trader of stocks and currencies.
Just conscious of time, so we'll do one more question and then Darren will respond to these questions online as well. How can we bring NFT technology into the corporate environment, put it to good use?
Well, so if you want to tokenize something, perhaps that's one way of tokenizing an asset or getting people skin in the game or part of something you want to promote. I kind of look at NFTs as some way, maybe an indirect way of getting into raising capital, funding, or to do a project. So there's thinking around how do you use that type of concept around, a share or a piece of information or a participation of something. The other way would be looking at an asset that you have and trying to break it up in a way that perhaps could be shared more broadly. So you're getting a skin in the game. Just as an example, I mean, it may not be the right example, but let's say one 5G network and you've got asset class around and you want to basically democratize that kind of asset in a different way via a token. You could look at that and participants of an ecosystem could trade those tokens on that asset or something to get some value out of that. So that's the way I would look at it in terms of bringing it from the digital and physical world. I think linking the digital and physical world. Versus perhaps creating pure digital assets like the art that we're seeing today or those type of trends that we're seeing today. The point really is getting into that space, because when you're in that space, it's a very different world. I'm definitely not an expert in the space, but I am across a lot of the things that we're seeing, and I do talk to a lot of people. So I think in that space is really interesting, and linking to trends like ESG or those kind of track and trace kind of trends that we're seeing across the network.
Awesome. Thank you, Darren. I think keep those questions coming on Slido. Darren will answer them offline, but please join me in thanking Darren for an awesome discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, the next session is really a panel, and it's kind of interesting because most CDOs question whether the digital initiatives are really creating value. So I'm going to hand off to Paul Mao, Senior Editor on Digital and AI Trends. Paul, over to you.